careful. Echo. Reverb or faster.
So I'm becoming off faster.
is the time of the service. We're going to continue worshiping, but if you want to give to the church, we're going to ask you right now to set aside your tithes and offerings to give to the church right now, and you can do that through texting. We have a text to give platform here at Miami Baptist Church, and I want to encourage the Antioch service, the young adults, to use this platform. You text 84321 and then $sign amount. So if God has put on your heart to give something to the ministry of this church, I want you guys to just give freely as a part of our worship service as we continue on. We're still here because God is worthy. So hopefully by the end of the service, you're going to walk out of these doors and you're not going to be thinking, man, I'm coming to church merely to get. But you're going to be thinking, I'm coming to church and I understand the right mindset is I need to be willing to give. If you keep pouring out, God will keep pouring in. God has called us to be servants of all. It says the greatest among us will be those who serve. So, let's follow in the Master's footsteps and make that our heart's desire as we come to church and we live out as the church in life. Let's be servants. Continue our worship. This is a reflection, hopefully, of what our life will look like outside of these walls. So let's open up, let's close this in a word of prayer and we'll open up the message in a word of prayer. Lord God, I want to pray right now that as we transition in this time of worship, that you would allow us to see what you have to say to us, that you would speak to us in our minds, but you would also quicken our hearts to be able to understand the truth that you want us to, so that way we can properly be able to give an answer for the hope that we have, Lord. We love you so much, and I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. You guys may be seated. So, we do have some food coming out if you guys want. I'm going to steal this from you, okay? No, you can take the icon. So I got a PowerPoint tonight because we're going to be using some cool stuff. So just bear with me for like 5 seconds. I'm going to set up the PowerPoint. Cheese sticks are ready?
Yeah.
Oh, you like them?
They're hot.
You guys, I made cheese sticks for you tonight. Yes. Yeah, I made cheese sticks tonight, so it's going to be delicious. And so, we're going to be having some fun. How you guys doing?
Good. Right.
Okay. All right, I'm going to use the mic so I don't have to use my voice. All right, so what did we talk about last week? For those of you who were here, and for those of you who weren't, you'll be able to chime in still. It's okay. But what did we go over last week as we hit on the first part of our apologetic or defending our faith series? So, who is all my people that were here are like in the other room getting cheese sticks. Like literally, everyone's like, cheese sticks? I'm out of here. Forget church.
Is that what you taught last week, cheese?
I taught that the reason to get people, the best way to get people into church is not the gospel, but cheese sticks. It's straight heresy, and as a result, I got fired. But I'm glad you guys are here. So last week we talked about the importance. We defined apologetics, and we talked about the importance of critical thinking. We went over what a claim is. Can anyone tell me what a claim is, just off the top of their heads, generally speaking? Huh?
No, I'm like trying to word it.
All right, let's see. A claim. What is a claim? Is a claim a question?
No.
Okay, no, it's not.
It's a declaration.
It's a declaration of truth, something being true or false. Okay, there you go. All right, so this is going to be a claim. So claims can either be true or false. They're not commands, right? They're not questions, but they're not necessarily definitions, but they're assertions of truthhood or falsehood in a statement. So this is something I want you guys to remember. We went over what premises are, vaguely, I think, right? We did talk about that. What's a premise, if you guys remember? This is important. It's just foundational stuff for you guys.
It's like what arguments you use
It's a part of an argument.
Before.
before the conclusion.
Before the conclusion, what does it do? So let's take the claim and bring it over to premise, okay? So what is it?
It sets up what you're arguing, right?
But is it a question? All right, so take
the topic of what the claims are getting at.
Okay, so it's going to be a series of claims that leads to a conclusion. I mean, that's the general idea. So all men are mortal. It's a claim, right? It's a true claim. Socrates is a man. It's a true claim. Therefore, Socrates is mortal, right? We're talking about my dog, of course. Name is Socrates. No, I'm just kidding. No, he's not a man. That doesn't work, does it? Okay, so here's the deal. Yeah, so that's it. So the first two lines of that argument, those are known as the premises, and the last line is known as a conclusion. Okay, so that is a conclusion of the matter. And we talked about critical thinking last week. We talked about claims. We talked about premises. we also talked about fallacies, and we went over a long list. Someone give me their favorite fallacy that we went over last week. We talked about different things such as double standard, equivocation. We went over straw man arguments, things of that nature. Someone give me your favorite that we went over, if you guys remember. This is good because you guys are like having to think past a week. That's 7 whole days of lapsed time that you have to go back and be like, oh, what did we talk about again? And then next week you're going to be prepared because he's going to be like, he's going to ask me, I know it. So you guys are going to remember a little bit better next week, and this is good. Okay, so give me one fallacy that you really enjoyed. You have red hair. What's a red herring? Somebody.
Is that when you set them up?
No.
You introduce something else to change the subject.
Something off topic or unrelated. All right, so yeah, so like, so something. Okay, so I crashed my car today, and I'm really frustrated. And I said, man, I just wish I didn't crash my car. And then somebody said, well, if you would have gotten the oil change like I told you to yesterday, then okay, well that has nothing to do with the fact that I crashed my car today, right? And so that would be a red herring, you know, so something of that nature. Okay. It'd also be known as a non sequitur, right? You guys, we talked about that too. What does that mean? It doesn't logically connect. And so sometimes it seems like things logically connect, but they don't. People trick you. All right. We talked about appeals to emotions. What does that mean?
Appeal to someone's emotion.
All right, good job. Don't you love it when you get the Latin ones? And the Latin ones are weird, non sequitur, right? And you're like, what the heck does that mean? And then you get the ones that are in English, like appeal to emotions, and you're like, oh, thank God. I can do that one. I can do that. Okay. Okay. So appeals to emotions are when you believe something based solely off of an emotional understanding. You don't have any evidence or proof behind it, but it's just simply an emotional appeal, and so you give belief to that claim without any evidence or truth value attached to it. And so this is going to be an appeal to the emotions. And so this happens. You see it happen in the news and in politics and things of that nature. But these are things that are parts of critical thinking. And the beautiful thing, if you know your fallacies, if you know what's going wrong in an argument, is it's going to help you go back to the one thing that we all should be looking for, which is truth. Okay? And so I know that some of this stuff seems wooden and boring to maybe some of you. To me, it's fascinating. I love it. But if you guys claim to be Christians and you want to be followers of Jesus who claims to be the truth, you should know or be able to tell what is counterfeit. And the way to do that, I hate to break it to you guys, is through study. You gotta study.
Studying is awesome, man.
Thank you. I'm totally on the same page. I love to study, but I wasn't born this way. I hated studying in high school. And then in middle school and high school, some things I like to study. You know, I study the Word and stuff. I always had a heart for the Word.
The worst.
But when I started to go to college, I got my degree in philosophy and religion, and in seminary, it started to bud even more and more. And now, I love to study. And these things are important for us to do on a regular basis. Keep your mind sharp. Keeps your mind sharp even into old age. It's good for you on top of everything. But it also makes Christians themselves palatable to a world that is unreasonable but begging for reasons. Okay? And this is something I think that the world does want. I think we do live in an age where reason isn't king anymore, but we are being choked out by postmodernism in a lot of instances in the colleges. And I think that it's dying. I think it's dying in the top tiers of philosophy. If you guys read philosophical journals or anything, which you probably don't, I don't much anymore anyways. I don't really anymore, actually, because I've been out of school for a few years. But what you see is postmodernism, which is, where you get deconstructionism, words don't matter, meaning doesn't matter, truth is truth for everyone, things of that nature. That philosophy in the philosophical world is actually dying out. And so what you'll actually see, just a general rule, is what goes on in high academics usually trickles down eventually into the modern into the society at large, right? And so I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years you're going to see that trickle down as well. But right now we're getting the trickle down effect of postmodernism, which is what you see at large in not only our universities but also our country at large as well. And so postmodernism is that deconstructive, words don't have meaning, all truth is, or my truth is just as valid as your truth, and it is about subjective claims more than objective reality. We talked about that last week, didn't we, too? Objective and subjective. What does somebody give me subjective? What does that mean?
An opinion.
Okay, so a truth claim that is based on person, right? So I feel I feel bad about that. Well, you might really feel bad about that. That might be a true statement, but it's based off of the person's feelings. It's based off of the subject. Or I feel hungry, or I have a headache, or sometimes even right and left, right? So this is right. Well, that's going to be a subjective claim because depending on where I'm standing in the room, my right's going to be different than yours. Whereas an objective claim is not going to be based on the subject claiming it, but an object outside of him, something that's independent of the object. So you have objective, which is going to be more concrete. Think objective, object, it's set in stone. You can't change it. Objective reality versus subjective reality, which is going to be based on an individual. There are subjective truths, right? I feel hungry. Well, you might not. Well, that's a subjective truth. It is valid. But some of them, like, I feel like murder's okay. Okay, that's an objective claim that I'm taking into subjectivity. That's not valid, okay? Yeah, so you're going to say, you had a question?
I just had a quick statement about like the postmodernism that you're talking about that's trickling down. Like in my medical school applications, I had some schools ask me what my preferred pronoun was and what gender I identified with, and this is like a medical school I'm applying to. This isn't like I'm not applying to like ballet or like art school or something. Like this is something that should be at the most objective level of what biology is supposed to be. And I'm being asked what.
Yeah. So you're gonna have issues like that. Where you're going to have redefinitions of terms, and you're going to have distinctions that weren't previously there, or seems like maybe they were there, but maybe to me at least, it seems like they weren't there. Such as the difference between male and your gender, gender and sex. Sorry, and you're going to have certain splitting of hairs and definition changes over time. And this does come with deconstructionism and things of that nature. And I actually have my roommate, my old roommate. He was in med school, and he's actually a believer in Christ, and so he's in a med school where there's a lot of non-believers, and so when he's talking, he takes the objective reality that biology isn't up to personal preference. It's not psychology, right? It's not you're dealing with a person's psychosis. You're dealing with a person's anatomy or things of that nature when you're doing medical stuff. And so he would argue. He'd be one of the few people that would argue that. Male is male and female is female when it comes to biology and things of that nature. And your biological sex determines your sex, and it's something that's not up for grabs for him. And he really stood alone in that, actually. And so, those are battles, but you know what? Like you fight them, and you just stay true to your own beliefs. And at that point, as to what you know the objective reality is in that situation, and there are good arguments for it. And we could hit on some of those maybe at the end if we want, but let's get started in our lesson. Today we're not going to be talking about such issues as those. If you guys want, let's bring it up at the end in a question and we can probably answer it, or I can do my best.
I was just supporting the postmodernist thing that you're
Yeah. And so that's a good recap of last week, minus the postmodernism that's a little bit new, but I want you to get used to this terminology. The modern age was the age of reason. It was ushered in with Rene Descartes, right? So he's going to be like one of the fathers of the modern age, and that's like a long, long time ago, right? And so that happened for a long time, up into the 20th century when you start the postmodern age. And the postmodern age is just like it sounds. It's after the modern age where meaning is less meaningful, I guess you can say. And then in the postmodern age, you see it actually dying out very quickly because even scientists and philosophers who aren't Christians, they have realized that to not have a claim in objective reality really is a bankrupt or illogical way to live. It doesn't make sense. And we'll go over some of those things today. And so you actually, even though it's been 100 years, so that seems a long time for us because we only live that long, right? But it's fairly short in a philosophical era, I guess you can say. Especially when you realize like scholasticism lasted for so long or things of that nature, I guess. And so we're going to be talking today about an argument for God's existence. So some of you guys, I want you guys to think, if you're talking to someone who doesn't know the Lord, and we're doing apologetics or defending our faith, sometimes you're going to be talking to people that do not believe in what you're talking about, right? Well, obviously, they don't believe, but they flat out just don't believe in God, period. Sometimes they do. Maybe they're Muslims, and we're not going to be talking about that today, right? And sometimes There are people of different faiths or whatever. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about those who are more atheistic in their beliefs, which means they don't believe there is a God, period. And I'm going to show you a logical argument that's a classical argument, and I think it's very good, even though some of your schools might shoot it down. I think it's pretty airtight logically. It's a classical argument for God's existence, and it's going to be a starting point. This argument alone doesn't necessarily prove the God of the Bible, but it's a starting point to get you into understanding that the God of the Bible is the one true God. And I'm going to show you the thought process. I'm going to do an overview real quick, okay, of the way we're going to go with these arguments. First, when we're talking in the next few weeks, so you guys can see that we're not just going nowhere, first thing we're going to be talking about are arguments for God's existence, okay? So that's the first thing. So we're going to be going over the cosmological argument. We're going to go over arguments from design, second. Like we're going to look at the evidence around us in the cosmos, right? And we're going to be looking at the evidence on Earth. We're going to look at fine-tuning. We're going to look at fine-tuning of the universe versus fine-tuning even of molecular biology and combinatorials, and you'll understand what that is probably next week. We're going to be looking at these things, and then we're also going to be talking, I'll briefly hit on the problem of evil, and then from there, because that's going to be a main objection for a lot of people that aren't Christians, and then from there, we're going to hit those two arguments. I'm not going to hit the ontological argument, which is the argument from being. We can briefly go over it. But from those two arguments, we're going to go from problem of evil into the argument for the resurrection of Jesus. Okay, and that's how we're going to get into the scriptures. Okay, so how do you get from God exists to the Bible is real and the God of the universe as revealed in the Bible is the one true God? Well, I think you do it through going through the avenue of arguing for the existence of Jesus, which is clearly he existed, but also the historical evidence upon the resurrection of Jesus. Because if he raised from the dead, then that means it gives credit to his claims as he was on this earth. And if that gives credit to his claims while he's on this earth and he affirms the scriptures and the validity thereof, then there's authority and weight to what he's saying. And it gives us a stronger, weightier argument to go back and understand or believe the Bible. So do you guys understand how we're getting back into it? So we can bypass, well, but there's genocide and things like that. We're going to bypass all that, and we're just going to do this. We're going to argue for God's existence, give good, strong arguments for God's existence, argue against the problem of pain and evil, okay? We're going to argue then, after that Jesus rose from the dead, okay? And then from there, we're going to argue for the reliability of the scriptures. Right? So if Jesus, the guy who rose from the dead and claimed to be God and ascends into heaven, if he claims that they're true and there's good historical reliability that he actually rose from the dead, then we should have strong evidence to believe that what he's saying is right, so we can say we have these views of the scripture, and also this is why we believe the Bible is also revelation from God itself. And so that's the avenue by which we're going to take, on our journey through apologetics for the next few weeks. And we're going to be hitting on a lot of cool things. I think it's very interesting. I want you guys to pay attention. It might get mentally strenuous or feel like a marathon in your brain, but don't worry. That just means your mind is expanding and growing. If you leave out of here and your brain hurts just a little bit, then that means I've done my job, okay? I want you guys to think a little bit broader and maybe even deeper than you guys have thought before. And the first argument we're going to be going over is the cosmological argument. This is an old argument, actually first presented by I think Aristotle. Maybe Plato did it first, but Aristotle is the guy who made this argument famous. We're not going to be focusing on how Aristotle argued it today. We're going to be actually talking about how Thomas Aquinas argued it today. He's a theologian, a very good philosopher, and we're going to be talking about his arguments for what we call the cosmological argument. And this is an argument from causation. You're going to see it in just a few seconds. But before we get into the cosmological argument, I want to ask you guys, what is 1 Peter 3:15? Can anybody say it from memory? If not, I want somebody open to that verse, and I want you guys in the next few weeks just to memorize this passage. That's 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. I think I need to memorize this passage again, right? So I've forgotten a lot of it. I can get the gist of it. All right, somebody open up to 1 Peter 3:15 and read it out loud for me. This is our rubric. This is how we are going to do apologetics in the weeks to come. Okay?
But in your hearts, regard Christ the Lord as holy, ready at any time to give a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you.
Okay, and do this with gentleness and respect, right? That's the end part.
That's 16.
Yeah, that's 16.
All right, go into that part.
Okay. Yet do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that when you are accused, those who disparage your good conduct in Christ will be put to shame.
All right, so do you guys see how we're supposed to do apologetics just from that verse? First thing we do is, in our hearts we set apart or sanctify or make holy Christ as Lord. The first thing that we're called to do is recognize the lordship of Christ and set that aside as first importance. Jesus is Lord. Therefore, I'm not here to merely win an argument, but I'm trying to understand the argument so that I might win a person. I want you guys to understand this concept. Okay? If you are doing apologetics so that you can be right and burn down people's arguments, you might be right, but I'm not calling you to be spiritual arsonists. Arsony is when you like to see things burn, right? I don't want you to see other people's arguments burn for the sake of burning, right? I want you to be able to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have so that you might win some. That means you need to use discernment. Even though you might know the right thing to say and might know the right answer, sometimes it's okay in an apologetic or a pre-evangelism conversation to walk away because you know that if you go further, you're going to be pushing this person further away from the gospel and not closer. Just because you know the right thing to say doesn't mean you always need to say it. This is wisdom. There's a time and place for everything, and sometimes things don't help, even if they're the right thing to say, right? Sometimes things hurt the situation more. So, if you find either party getting heated, maybe it's okay for you to take a break. But if you see a cool head across from you who's genuinely seeking answers, and you're actually having a beneficial conversation, then you know this guy's right for the picking. I'm going to continue this conversation. Your goal, once again, and this is a good rubric, set aside Christ as Lord. The Lord Jesus has called us to go make disciples, not burn non-disciples, right? So this is not our job. Remember, we're supposed to win people, not arguments. That's our main goal. Now, if in winning people we win an argument, that is great, and that's why we're talking today. But if you see someone being pushed more away because they're being more emotional, and we'll talk about this in the problem of pain or the problem of evil, they're being more emotional with it, then back off, and maybe, just maybe, they don't need a logical argument, but they need an arm around their shoulder, and they need a hug or love, and to be demonstrated the love of Jesus Christ. Okay? So this is something you'll see in the problem of evil. There's going to be two types of people in the problem of evil. There's going to be those who actually argue, and they're actually concerned with the logical problem of evil or the problem from pain, and things of that nature. They're actually interested in the arguments, and there's going to be people that don't believe that God exists because of all the evil in the world on an emotional basis. And you need to diagnose that, because if they're arguing from emotions, your reasonable arguments aren't going to help them. They need an arm around them. They need the love of Jesus, and sometimes it's just best to shut your mouth and hug them, or to be there for them, or be a listening ear, and show them the love of Christ. And this is a good distinction for us to make. In your heart, set apart, Christ is Lord. Always be prepared. Sometimes be prepared. That's why we're doing the hard stuff, okay? Always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have. A reason for the hope that you have. And we're supposed to do this then with gentleness and respect. Remember the rubric, or else you might do more harm than good. We're supposed to win people. With that being said, we have no excuse. We always need to be prepared. And so, tonight, we're going to be going over probably my favorite argument for God's existence. It's called the cosmological argument. But before we get into it, let's talk about something that I think you guys need to understand to get this argument. We're going to be talking about infinite regresses and reductions to absurdity. Okay? Doesn't that sound fun?
Yeah.
All right. We're going to have some fun with this. Okay, so what is a reduction to absurdity? It's a skill in arguing that you're going to see applied, you'll see it in this argument, I think, right? You're going to see it in the cosmological. If you reduce it to absurdity, an infinite regress becomes absurd, okay? I think that's where I went with it. Reduction to absurdity. A method of refuting a claim by extending the logic of the opponent's argument to a point of absurdity. aka the reductio argument. So if you ever hear someone say, haha, reductio, right? That's reduction. Okay, so the reductio argument, or argumentum ad absurdum, okay? And so let's talk about reductions to absurdity real quick. Excuse me. All right, so let's look at relativism. So say you think everything is relative, okay? Why is relativism an absurd claim? Everything is relative, okay? So we'll talk about it. Let's go over two premises to a conclusion, okay? Follow the logic here. I'm going to reduce this statement to absurdity. If somebody ever comes up to you and says, everyone's beliefs are right? Sounds very postmodern, doesn't it? Well, I believe you're wrong. All right, you see? Therefore, I'm right. Do you see how it's a reduction to absurdity? I've showed a huge logical hole in your argument, and it's blatant. Okay? All right, so everyone's beliefs are right. Well, I believe you're wrong. Well, I'm not wrong, am I? Good. Okay, or let's think of another one. There is no truth. Is that a true statement? There is no truth. Well, is that true? If that statement is true, then there is at least one thing that's true, and there's some objective reality out there. Or objective truth. If there is no truth, then not even that statement it can be true, and there's no way to even verify what we're saying. It's nonsense. Okay? So, another thing, so what I want you guys to understand tonight when we're talking about the cosmological argument is that an infinite regress, which means going back forever and ever, is absurd. A lot of people throughout history have believed that the universe is infinite. In time going backwards and in space going outwards. This is false. In both instances. First, if you even look at, what is his name? He passed away recently. Oh man, Stephen Hawking. If you look at his work, he shows the expansion of the universe, not just in matter, and I think this is the big misconception with Big Bang physics, right? Is people when you learn it in space and in school, you're taught that matter is going outward infinitely, right? That's actually not the Big Bang theory, okay? The Big Bang theory is that both time and space are expanding outward. Time and space. Oh, I don't understand that, right? Well, we actually see that space is expanding. If you do cosmology, which is the study of the universe, you'll actually see that space itself is expanding outward. Not just matter, but there's actual expansion in space itself. In any given point in the universe, everything is moving away from that point. It's weird, right? So if I am on Earth, right, and I'm looking outward, everything looks like it's moving away because space itself is expanding. If I'm on Mars, everything else looks like it's moving away because space is expanding. How do you explain this? Think of it like a balloon. And I don't have one. It's really better if I have a balloon in my hand, but I don't have one on me today. Think if I had a balloon and I put dots all over the balloon, and those dots represent the universe, okay? If I blow up the balloon, the space on the balloon actually expands on the outside, right? So just imagine there's no space on the inside, just it's metaphor, okay? And as you expand the balloon more and more, the dot stays in the center, but everything around it starts to expand and expand and expand. Okay, this is the idea behind the Big Bang. Okay, and this is something that even if you are a non-Christian or a Christian, this is commonly accepted in science. This is the main view, which means at one point, if space and time are expanding outward, at one point, there was a beginning to both time and space, right? Space and time. This is... in fact, an actual infinite regress is impossible. Just to go back in time forever and ever would be like getting an infinite series of IOUs with no one at the beginning that actually gave out without any baseline. Here's an IOU, but who gave it, right? It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so if an infinite regress is true, you can never get to where you are today. It is impossible. You need a starting point in order to get to where you are today. You need a bottom point in order to move forward or move up. I didn't fully understand an infinite regress until I got into college, so if you don't get it right now, don't worry, it's okay. Think about it later as you're laying your head down on your pillow. Just understand that an infinite regress is impossible. It's logically absurd. if you could have an infinite regress, why didn't you get to where, so an actual infinite regress is absurd. If true, you could never get to where you are today. If you could, why didn't you get there yesterday? There's been an infinite amount of time that's already elapsed. There's no reason for us to have not gotten to wherever we need to go yesterday or things of that nature. An infinite regress is absolutely absurd. We have to start somewhere. You can write a timeline out and make it seem like it's infinity, right? But you have to start somewhere in order to measure forward. And this is something I want you guys to think about. And we'll be going over arguments for this right now. All right, so think about this. So not only is time finite, it's measurable, but space is finite too and measurable. And anything that's finite cannot be infinite. It would be a contradiction in terms, wouldn't it? All right, so if I can measure 1 second to the next, that proves that time itself is measurable. If it was immeasurable, I wouldn't be able to measure it. If it was infinite, I would not be able to measure it. It would not be finite. If it's finite and it's measurable, that means there's limits. We are arguing that there are limits to both time and space. If I can do this and this, that means even the known universe, which is a part of the Big Bang Theory, right? Even the known universe has limits. Space is expanding, right? But this is still measurable. If I can do this and say this is a measurement, that means there are limits to space. Why? Because I'm arguing that based on this measurement right here, therefore space itself and time itself are not infinite. They must have a beginning. So we're going to be talking about that today. And what's known as the cosmological argument. So whenever you think cosmological, it's a fancy word, but just think cause. It's not the same word. Cosmological has to do with the cosmos, right? But cause, you can use it as a mnemonic device. A cosmological argument, just think cause and effect, okay? But the first argument we're going to go over is from Thomas Aquinas. It's going to be the argument from motion. And I want you guys to think about this. Argument from motion. Everything that is in motion is moved by something else. Okay? First argument. First premise. Everything that is in motion is moved by something else. Infinite regress is impossible. Therefore, there must be a first mover. Imagine a domino string that is coming your way. Would you believe if that was going on for eternity? That would be absurd, wouldn't it? Where did that start? Someone had to push it over. All right? It's not an infinite. Dominoes themselves aren't infinite. They're finite. Therefore, there must be a beginning point. Okay, so, all right, let's put it this way. All moving things have a source of motion. There must have been some original source of motion unmoved by anything else. This we call God, the unmoved mover. So maybe you guys have heard in philosophy the arguments from, you heard of the unmoved mover or the uncaused cause. This comes from Thomas Aquinas. So this is the argument for motion. All moving things have a source of motion. This is deduction. All moving things have a source of motion. There must have been some original source of motion unmoved by anything else. This we call God. It's pretty interesting, right? Are you guys sticking with me?
Yeah.
Are you guys interested?
Yeah.
Because we got another one. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is the argument from cause. Argument from cause. Here, every effect has a cause. Every effect has a cause. Infinite regress is impossible. Therefore, there must be a first cause. All right. Or, everything which exists must have a cause of its existence. Oops. There cannot be an infinite chain of causes stretching back into the past. There must have been some first caused, uncaused by anything else. There needs to be an uncaused cause. There needs to be an unmoved mover, an uncaused causer, and this is the argument from cause, and there's another one, and this is the argument from contingency. Now this one's interesting. It's a little bit longer. But I want you guys to understand what contingency means. So, contingency needs to be understood in light of necessity. Okay? If a being is contingent, it is dependent on something or someone else for its existence. In other words, if the being that exists can come into or out of existence, then that proves that it is a contingent being. At one time, did you guys not exist? Huh?
Yes.
Yeah, at one time you didn't exist. That means that you are contingent upon certain factors and ultimately one ultimate factor for your existence. But there is a necessary being, and we'll be going over that in a second. So, contingency has to do with everything in the universe that has finite boundaries. If it is limited or limitable, then it's going to be defined as contingent. Dependent on something or someone else for its existence. Are you guys tracking with me?
Yeah.
Why? Why? Because it could not exist. And at one time it did not exist, and some things do exist that didn't exist before, and don't exist that do exist before. And there needs to be an explanation for those things. Alright, so your brain's kind of like, what's going on? Okay, so, alright, so the long version. We're going to go over the long version of the argument. There are present contingent beings, things that are possible to not be. There are present, all of us. That's literally everyone and everything in this room is contingent. Alright, whatever can fail to exist at some time does not exist. At some point in time does not exist. Right? At one point in time you didn't exist. At some time you won't exist. Okay? Therefore, if all beings are contingent, then at one time nothing existed. If all beings are contingent, then at one time nothing existed. Whatever begins to exist is caused to begin to exist by something else already existing. I came from my mother. All right, are you guys tracking? You see the logical flow here? Therefore, if at some time nothing existed, then nothing would have existed at any later time. If nothing existed at one time, and then nothing can come from nothing, right? Unless, okay? So, if at one time nothing existed, then nothing exists now. Unless, right? There's going to be no. But here's the idea. If everything is contingent, then that means at one time nothing existed. And therefore, so if at one time nothing existed, then nothing can exist now. So if all beings are contingent, if all beings, right? So we haven't even talked about God, but say every single being that exists right now is contingent, nothing exists now. What's the problem? Something does exist now, right? Okay. Hence not all beings are contingent. Not all beings are contingent. There is at least one necessary being. Why? Because there are present things in existence. Alright. Every necessary being either has its necessity caused by another, or it has its necessity in itself. There cannot be an infinite series of necessary beings, each having its necessity caused by another. Therefore, there is a necessary being having of itself its own necessity. And this all men speak of as God. Taken from a book by Alvin Plantinga and his layout of the Aquinas argument. But this is something I want you guys to see. That not only do we need an uncaused cause and an unmoved mover, but we need a necessary being for which all of us who are measurable and finite can have an explanation for our existence. Not only are we finite in dimensions, right, but we're also finite in the scope of time. At one point I did exist, and at another point I won't exist. At one point before that I didn't exist. I came in and out of existence, and so that means I am a contingent being. And if nothing comes from nothing, there needs to be at least one thing that is not contingent, but rather necessary. And this we're going to argue as God. So these are the cosmological arguments that Aquinas will argue for. Well, let's really simplify it, okay? So that's the long version. Argument from contingency, the short version, okay? This is the one that you guys want to write down. Okay. Some contingent beings exist. If any contingent being exists, a necessary being exists. Therefore, a necessary being exists. Okay? So if any contingent being exists, a necessary being exists. A contingent being exists, therefore, a necessary. This is modus ponens, right? So it's a logical argument. It is valid, okay? And if you guys are wondering what books, I brought some books here. If you guys are free to look at them and whatnot, back in the back. All right, now we get to a fun one. Okay, so this is Thomas Aquinas. But then years and years later, a guy named William Lane Craig comes along, and he's a popular philosopher today. He's a very influential philosopher. Probably the most influential philosopher is that guy Alvin Plantinga that I was talking about. I have one of his books back there as well. But what I want you guys to look at, William Lane Craig's argument from contingency. He did his doctoral dissertation on this, I think under John Hick, which is really, but I think that's the one he did under him. But this is his like life's work. But it's a very good argument because if the premises are true, the conclusions have to be true. Look at the first premise of this argument. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. All right. I began to exist, I have a cause. That duck began to exist, it has a cause. That speaker began to exist somewhere, it has a cause. Okay, so whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now we look at things like, what is his name again? I forgot. He just recently passed away. I said it earlier. Stephen Hawking. There it is. Okay. It's slipping my mind. We look at Stephen Hawking's work, and he's proven through his work the expansion of the universe and space-time. It's very, even atheists will argue the expansion of space-time. Okay, which means that the universe had a beginning to its existence, both in space and in time. Very crazy. This does not. So whenever you hear someone say Big Bang and you're a Christian, you're like, I'm so afraid. Don't be. This actually helps the Christian cause. They are arguing for a beginning of the universe, not just a point in time where matter explodes, but a point in time where space and time start to go outward. It is crazy that they're coming to this conclusion without a concept of God in their mind, or trying to elude one, right? Or try to get away from one. So, most people, atheists, agnostics, scientists, whomever, they're going to believe this first premise. They're going to believe whatever begins to exist, or it's going to be a strong premise. It's very strong. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. All right? Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Okay. The universe began to exist. This is so simple. Therefore, the universe has a cause. It's so simple. It's a beautiful argument. And it's pretty airtight because those two premises, whatever begins to exist, the universe began to exist, those, if they are true, the conclusion must be true. Must be true. That's how deductive arguments work. So what you do is you argue for either premise with strong evidence. Okay? And if you can prove through strong evidence that those first two premises are strong, then you have given a very solid argument that conclusion is true. All right, and you'll see some of his evidence here. I have a video for you guys. All right, okay, hold on. All right, so pay attention to the screen and see if...
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. And if something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Alvin Board, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, proved that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
So, pretty powerful stuff. I think it's pretty solid. Remember, what we are arguing for is we are arguing for an inference to the best explanation here. Whenever you hear someone, even as a result of an argument like this, saying, well, you're just putting God in there because you don't know what else to say or whatever. Here's the deal, and then people will call this the God of the gaps kind of thing. You guys heard that before? Okay. Here's the deal. We are looking for the inference to the best and most reasonable explanation. And the best explanation for what we just saw would be a powerful personal being. Okay? If you guys want to understand something, if they give that argument to you, if you ever hear something like that, God of the gaps kind of thing, just point back to them that they're doing science of the gaps, right? So they're filling in scientifically what they don't know as well. They're doing the same exact thing, but the problem is the evidence is less on their side than it is on yours. So at which point you just say, the best explanation for what we have is not going to be, naturalistic data, but it seems to point to an uncaused creator of the universe who is magnificently large and personal, right? And so this is going to be the inference of the best explanation. It is going to be the most reasonable response. So don't let people fool you by God of the gaps kind of stuff. You can literally just turn it right back around on them. But I want to finish up. The cosmological argument, does it strictly argue for the God of the Bible? Not necessarily, but it does argue that the universe had to exist and that something caused it. And I think the best explanation is God. I think it's it's probably my favorite argument for God's existence. And then next week we're going to go into teleological arguments. We're going to be talking about the fine-tuning of the universe and arguments from design and things of that nature. I don't know if we're going to be able to have time to get into all of them, but we can at least hit on the fine-tuning of the universe. It's very powerful stuff. You guys, it is crazy how improbable it is for us to have life here on this planet, let alone in this whole universe, right? To have a life-permitting universe is incredibly slim. And then to have a planet with life-permitting boundaries is also incredibly slim. When you put all that stuff together, it does seem that the inference of the best explanation there is going to be a personal being who is causing things. All right? And so I want to look at some scriptures in the Bible. Genesis 1:1 that shows that that God is the causer of all things. You guys know this one? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Hebrews 11:3. Here we see, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. He made it, in Latin the word is ex nihilo, out of nothing. He made visible with his words, merely, that was the starting point. There was no matter, then there was matter, because the word of God said it mattered. This is how it worked. He spoke things into existence. And then we see here something, because we always got to come back around to the gospel and we'll wrap up. Then we see in Christianity, Colossians chapter 1, 15 through 20. The Son is the image of the invisible God. God in the flesh, God was pleased to dwell in the Son, the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Now this is something that's crazy beautiful. God the Son, firstborn over all creation. Through him everything's existing. If everything was made through him, I want you to catch this about the gospel. Then everything can be remade through him. And this is why it's so important that he came and died for our sins to create a new creation, where the old is gone and the new has come. So let's go over the verse. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. He is the beginning of our creation, and he is the beginning of our new creation. I am redeemable because the same Jesus through whom everything was made, through him everything is remade. This is powerful. He's the head of the body. Verse 19, for God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile the world, reconciled himself to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. And we come back to the gospel. That God had a plan from the beginning, not only to create, but also to love in personal relationship the pinnacle of his creation, mankind. People created in God's image, restored to God's proper image in Christ Jesus. It's powerful. And this is the God we worship. So the cause of all things has caused new things to come about in Christ. And so I want us to wrap up there. I know all of us here are Christians. And so I hope this encourages you. I want to open up. I'm going to pray. Well, before I pray, I want to open up just for a few minutes. I know we were going a little long. Technically, we started at 7:15, so we're like an hour and 10 minutes over. So okay, or around 2 minutes long. Okay, but let me open up the floor for any questions you guys might have. Yeah.
When you were talking about things that are finite can't be infinite,
Mm-hmm.
And you set time. So if you could like measure something, then that means that by default it can't be infinite.
Yes.
But what about numbers?
Numbers are abstract concepts. We put on numbers. On numbers themselves, they're representatives for sets or things of that nature. I guess you could say, but they're not actual, right? And so if I have two actual rocks, I can count 1 and 2. But conceptually, I can take out and go conceptually beyond. But even if I sat down with a pen and paper, I will never, ever, ever, by definition, reach infinity. Ever. I can go 1 and say I lived forever. Say I lived and I never stopped living. Say I go to heaven and die one day, and God says, you know what, just to prove to you that there is no such thing as an actual, like in a physical reality, in the finite reality, actual infinite finite reality. I want you to sit down and for all of eternity, maybe this will be someone's hell. Okay, I don't know. He's going to say, write down all the numbers until you stop. Will he ever stop? Ever?
No.
Exactly.
But isn't that the definition of infinity?
Infinity is a representative of a whole set, right? And so there is no such thing as an actual infinite, right? And so you can have an infinite go on in one direction, but you can't have an infinite go on in 2 directions. And so an actual infinite is not just simply going to be eternal in one direction.
Oh, so that's what you're saying about the infinite regression.
Yes, yeah, and so you can go forward into an infinite amount of time, and we're using we're using the language, but basically we're just meaning forever and ever and ever. But you can't actually have an infinite in finite nature, right, with no beginning and no end, with no beginning and no end, right? When we're talking about finite things, or else we come into absurdities. Let's talk about time itself, or space itself, like if it's. I think it's a good. If it is by definition, if we're talking about an analytic truth, this is like a by definition. If something is measurable, then it cannot then be by definition immeasurable. Right. And so this is
what you're saying.
okay. And so this is something that's a good principle. If something is finite, then it cannot by definition be infinite when you put them together. Next to each other. You're going to have it's going to have limitability, whether the set is 100 or 1 million or 1 billion. It's still going to be finite. And so, in actual reality, not in numbers themselves, right? Conceptually, we can go on to infinity, but in actuality, in reality, if there's measurability, then yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I don't know how to word it, but so since we as Christians, we believe God is the ultimate, he's the start. But for atheists or people who don't believe in God, which is an atheist, well, how do they, do they agree that there is a start, but it's just not God?
So they'll argue.
How do they wrap their minds around?
Yeah. So you'll see next week. There's when you go down to the actual science, it points back to an actual beginning of time and space. That's what the science will get you to. But anything beyond that is going to be what's known as metaphysics or philosophy, right? And so you're going to have to speculate beyond the natural inferences that you're able to get from nature into what you think or theories of what you think the way things are. And so you're going to hear, I think the most popular, you saw him point out like the oscillating universe, that it comes, so like a series of Big Bangs, The problem with that is eventually, no matter what, it's one, you have an infinite regress potentially, but no matter what, it needs to die out eventually as well. But that's one theory that's not very popular. The oscillating theory, the most popular theory is you're going to see out there is going to be what's known as the multiverse theory. And so sort of like there's a multiverse machine pumping out universes. But the problem with this is you're just one step removed from the premise of the uncaused cause, which is for everything that exists, there's a cause, right? And all you're doing is pushing the argument back one step, but it's still the same argument applies. You still can't have an infinite regress. More universes doesn't mean the argument is moot, right? And so just because you are making a metaphysical claim to a multiverse, right, saying, okay, well, I don't believe in God, so I'm going to say there's multiple universes, and we're living in the one that by chance alone has the ability to produce life. Okay, well, where did all those multiverses come from? Where do those multiverses come from? Where do those come from? Where do those come from? Where do those come from? I could go on forever and ever, right? But that would be illogical. You matter what. You're just pushing it back a step. So that's how they would explain it. They'll do anything.
So
They go into metaphysical claims.
So would an atheist look at a Christian, because we say God is the starting point, would an atheist look at us and be like, well, who created God then?
Yes, yeah. So that's actually one of the big arguments for Richard Dawkins, and I think it's a terrible argument because by definition God is going to be an uncaused being. So it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the definition of who God is. So if God is going to be uncaused, then that necessitates, once again, analytically, by the definition of the word, that he is uncreated, uncaused, right? And so that's a fundamental analytical misunderstanding of who God is, first and foremost. Secondly, the argument who created God does a logical error as well. It's assuming, this is something that William Lane Craig will point out about Dawkins' argument as well. It assumes that simply because, it assumes that I don't want to get it wrong. He gives an analogy, so I'll just do the analogy. If I come across an arrowhead in the Mojave Desert, and I pick up that arrowhead in the Mojave Desert, and I think the best explanation to that arrowhead is that somebody carved it a long time ago who was an Indian, right, or a Native American, what have you, would I be making an illogical assertion? No, I wouldn't. It'd actually be a good explanation. I don't need to know who caused who. That's actually, it's almost like a red herring, right? Now, one, I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of who God is. Secondly, it has nothing to do with his argument. The point is, someone created what we have here today. There is a design, or there's something going on, right? And so we don't need to explain who created who to know that there is something here today that exists because it was caused by something else. That's a silly argument. Oh, I found a car. Well, who caused the guy who caused the car? No. Hey, all I need to know is that the car is there and it was caused by something, and as a result, it's a good argument. So there's two flaws there. I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding of who God is, and also it's not needed necessarily in the argument that's being argued. Okay, and so, any other questions? Yeah.
I think this one, I think I'm stretching it a little bit, but with the statement of everything that exists has a cause,
Mm-hmm.
how does someone not turn around and say, well, if you're saying God doesn't have a cause, then it can't exist?
Well, that's a similar argument than who created God or whatever. So everything that exists has a cause, and I think this is with the so with God himself, he's going to be self-caused. Remember, his necessity, if you remember the Aquinas argument, is going to be within himself. All right, so he is the reason for his existence in a sense, and he is the
like his nature, pretty much.
Yes,
what
yeah,
you're saying,
and so
right?
yeah, and so everything that exists has a cause, and I think maybe more narrowly, I think it might be. I don't know. Craig would probably be able to answer this. Maybe you could send in a question into reasonable faith, and he'll give a better answer than I will. But everything that is in the finite universe that exists, right, within the realm of contingent things has a cause, right?
Yeah.
So this is, and I think God will be argued to have a cause in and of himself. He is the uncaused cause, and this being a necessary being as opposed to a contingent one means the necessity for his existence lies within himself, not in other things, right? So, and that's going to be the difference between necessary and contingent as well. Yeah, what's up?
So in other terms, he made himself.
No, he did not make himself. So this is, once again, an understanding of who God is. If God himself is an eternal being, he's always existed. He is always in being, right? And so just because this is beyond comprehension does not mean it is illogical. Okay, and so there's nothing illogical about always existing. We talk about finite things having the inability to be actually infinite, but we are not speaking of God as a finite thing, but rather as an unlimited, by definition, or infinite thing, or infinite person. There can only be one infinite, I would argue. And by definition, God is going to be that infinite being who causes all things. And so, this is where we have to work within definitions or parameters of who God is. Okay, and so finally, I want to address, just for fun, before we close in prayer, I'm sorry for going a little long, but let's address the transgender thing just real quick. Just for, I know that we're all in here. We all deal with it on a regular basis, or we hear about it in the news or whatever. And I want to give you sort of my take on it and what I would argue, what you're going to find in Christianity. Yeah.
Wait, can you say what you said before? Before your argument.
Which part?
Like whatever he said.
I can't. You gotta help refresh me.
Like you said something.
Go look on YouTube later.
What?
Yeah, check it out on YouTube later. Yeah, it'll be on YouTube. Okay, so I want to talk about the transgender. Let's talk about the transgender question you had at the beginning, just so you guys know. As Christians, we believe in what's known as essentialism. We believe that our essence is within us at birth, right? We have, therefore, essential properties and accidental properties. An accidental property is not like, oops, I did an accident. It just basically means something on me that is not essential, okay? So if I lose my arm, my arm would be an accidental property, just to give you guys a quick overview of this. If I lose my arm, which would be an accident, will I be any less me than I was before I lost my arm? No. I'm still just as much me as before. Why? Because my essence has not changed. My essential property has not changed, though my accidental property has changed. Okay? And so I believe that when we're talking about gender, we're not talking about essential properties. We're talking about accidental properties. Your gender is found in your chromosomes and your biology. Right? It's not something basically that comes from inside. It is something that is determined by the X or Y. So this is something. This is an accidental property. I think it has to be an accidental property. I don't think it's an essential property. So when somebody argues to you, I feel as though inside I am a woman, it is not up for their feelings or God made me this way on the inside. It's not up for their feelings to interpret it. It is a property that is given to you at birth. That's what it is. And so I don't even know if there's going to be male and female in heaven. I have no idea. And it doesn't bother me because I know I'm going to be in heaven. Okay? And so whenever somebody argues, I feel like a woman on the inside or I feel like a man, I think that we're actually dealing with a psychological issue, not a biological issue at that point. Okay? The problem as a Christian, if you argue for transgenderism and Christianity, is that Jesus himself came down to this earth as a male and never claimed not to be a male. And if there was maleness inside of him as an essential property as opposed to simply an accidental property, then he only died for males on this earth. Why? Because his essence was male. His essence and accidents were both males, and that means females. We got a problem, don't we? Right? But what was the essence of who he was? It was humanity. It was human, right? And so it was a part of his essential property. So therefore, we can apply the death of Christ to all people because gender isn't something you feel on the inside. Okay? We emphasize masculinity and femininity. I think this is a good thing because we do have different properties. Men are more fit to protect ladies, and ladies are beautiful and they need protection because that's the order in which God created things. But I think as well we need to be able to distinguish that this itself is not something that is up for my individual interpretation or subjective opinion. Okay? Much like race, I can't go out and say, the color of my skin is an essential property to who I am. Right? This is terrible on YouTube, I'm sorry. I'm proud of being white, my whiteness, right? And my essential whiteness is, and Jesus was white, so therefore only white people are going to heaven. No, that's terrible. That'd be a terrible thing. Right? So that would be wrong. It's an accidental property, and it's something that it's not up for grabs, and it's not something that I can change. Therefore, it's not something I should discriminate on. And so this is within the Christian worldview. I think it is hard for you to be both transgender or argue for it, at least philosophically speaking, and Christian. Yeah.
About the whole, what you just said about like Jesus being white, so only white men are going to be Jesus. Isn't that one of the fallacies?
Which one? What do you think it is?
I'm not too sure how to explain it myself, but think about it.
You'd have to show me. I don't know off the top of my head. It's fallacious, I think, based off of the philosophy and whatnot. Now,
Yeah, it's a bit.
now the hard part is if you don't believe in essence, and you're just a naturalist and you believe in transgenderism, then here's one argument is why not? Like, okay, I'm not going to expect you to. I get it, but the other thing is all you are is your biology. I don't understand how you're arguing for an essential property if you're not an essentialist. So I see some conflicts in philosophy there. I'm not going to get mad at you if you're not a Christian and you argue for transgenderism, because I'm not going to expect you to adhere to the values that I adhere to, or I'm going to win you to Jesus. That's going to be my goal, right? But I think as someone who is an essentialist, I think it's essential, right, not to equivocate, to understand that these this is not an accidental property and even still, even if it was an essential property, even if it was, I don't think it can be argued that we determine our me-ness, what makes me, even so. But regardless, I think it is strictly an accidental property. I know it's philosophical language. But I think it's helpful. It's helpful for me, and it gives you an understanding that even though people might disagree with you, at least you have a reason. They might not like your reason, but at least you have one. Okay, so do you guys understand? Did you guys track along with me?
Yeah.
All right. So let's wrap up. Let's pray. Sorry for going so long, but Q&A is fun, right? You guys come with more questions next week, okay? Lord, thank you so much for the time that we had together. I want to just pray right now that you help expand our minds and help us to grow. Lord, help us to invite our friends to this, maybe people that don't know you, Lord. We love you so much, and I praise in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we got no fish sticks. We got some coffee in the pack. Okay. Or cheese sticks. Cheese sticks.
Fish sticks.